Hi, welcome to City Beat. This is your host, Ken Adams, and this week we're going to be talking about a climate action plan for the city of Salem. And joining me today is Laurie Dougherty and Linda Wallmark from 350.org, the local Salem chapter. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that's kind of overdue discussion. So maybe you could give us a little bit of history, Laurie, about 350.org and what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 350, well, it's a number that has a scientific basis. That's the amount of carbon dioxide in parts per million in the atmosphere that's safe for the climate. But the 350.org and the group that we're a part of, we remind ourselves of the science with that number, but we are involved with mobilizing, educating, activism around climate issues, climate policies, different things that we want. 350.org is an international organization that is active in 188 countries. Several years ago, people started actually forming chapters instead of just doing one-off days of action, and so we could be more coherent and consistent about what we do, work on local issues also, and there are 5 chapters in Salem. We are 350 Salem, Oregon, and we work on some of the international issues, like around the climate summits. They will have marches and rallies. We work on state issues. We are involved in advocating at the legislature around some bills we're interested in right now. We also did a bunch of rallies and fundraising around the Dakota Access Pipeline and Native Americans in North Dakota, supporting their effort. And we work on local issues, and that, what we want to talk about today is we have we want the city of Salem to introduce a climate action plan, which is a set of policies that will address climate change both in city's own operations and facilities and in the community. And Portland was one of the first to do this. Eugene, Ashland, Bend, they either have a climate action plan or are working to develop one. They've got their process started. Salem, all over the country and all over the world, cities are doing this. And it's really important because the federal government won't do it. So it's important for cities and states to step up and do it. Salem, we've been researching this for several months, and as far as we know, it's the only big city in Oregon that does not have a climate action plan. So the city has embarked on its own strategic action plan to develop goals, and we have interacted with that process and are hoping that they will include a climate action plan as one of their goals. So we've been involved with working with the city council, talking to them, and city staff and the mayor, talking about this at various points within that strategic plan process.
And what kind of response have you gotten from the city?
It's been, some of the councilors are very interested and supportive, and they talk with us and we engage with them. The mayor has been curious about it. I don't have a good read on how he really feels about it. But we are working, to try and get on their radar,
And so far the city has addressed 6 different goals that they are interested in adopting. So they're looking at growth and development, affordable housing, and social services, especially in regards to the homeless, economic development, transportation, and sustainable service delivery. And so this climate action plan that we are recommending is, we brought it up as a 7th goal that we would like them to consider, and they sent it to staff to look at it, and they are going to be considering adopting it as a goal. So that's where we stand right now in the process.
Well, it'd probably be helpful when they're talking about developing the city, about where they develop. Maybe having more infill where you already have transportation and infrastructure to handle more population rather than spreading out. And so I would just think that would fit well with that first goal that they want to address.
Well, definitely the climate action plan is like embedded in all of those.
Right.
And yet, unless you have an overarching kind of a plan, you don't really have a way of managing it. And making sure that in fact we are moving toward resilient policies in the face of climate change. And if I may, I'd like to kind of just segue from that into just talking about why we really do need a climate action plan. And a part of this is just kind of relitigating the whole reality of climate change, because it does come back to this notion that climate change is a reality that we must address. And you know, it is in fact an established science. There is no controversy about it. All of the nations of the world, all of the recognized scientific associations around the world, and all of the national academies of sciences in the countries that have them acknowledge climate change as real and as human caused. So it's established, it's real, it is human caused. In fact, all of those factors that drive the cycles, and there are cycles, long-term cycles in climate, but all of those factors right now would be pushing us toward a cooling trend. And in fact, what we're seeing is an accelerating heating trend. That is as a result of human activity. And so, it's happening right now. We have been shattering global temperatures. So the average global temperature was, we hit our first record in 2014. That was like the hottest it had ever been in recorded time, until 2015. And then we shattered that record until 2016, and then we broke that record. So, the temperatures are going up. It really is a real danger that we actually need to address.
Well, one of the problems, though, is there's a lot of media claiming that it's not real. There's a lot of people denying this reality. In fact, there was a letter to the editor about 2 weeks ago. And one of the points the person made, which just flabbergasted me, he was saying that most scientists agree that the Middle Age warming period was far warmer than today. And I'm sitting there thinking, most climate scientists say that that was a North Atlantic anomaly, that it wasn't a worldwide situation. In fact, worldwide, the temperature was slightly cooler. And so it makes me wonder, where are these people getting these facts? Who's feeding misinformation into the system? Because, it was somebody that was serious about, challenging it, but he had, that was one of the first facts he had, and I was going, wait a minute, you don't know what you're talking about. And
you got that right about
medieval warfare. And the scientific consensus it really is clear. And I don't want to take us too far down that road, because I don't want to have our attention mainly focused right there. But if we want to be resilient and strong and prepare for this, what all scientists are saying about this, everybody except for the only contrary view are those industry-funded groups they are the people that are supplying the alternative facts, the alternative data. But we need to be prepared, because in Oregon, we're already seeing impacts. We are seeing now, granted, we had a cold, long winter and spring. We all suffered through that. And there are and will continue to be those kinds of natural variabilities. But that's weather. That's not climate. Climate is long-term trends. And in fact, the long-term trend is and will continue to be rising temperatures in Oregon, increased drought, increased severity and frequency of wildfires, decreased snowpack, shifting of climate patterns that definitely affect our agriculture, our tourism, our forestry. I mean, my husband and I do a lot of camping, and we drive around the Pacific Northwest and down into California. We see with our own eyes these dying trees. So it has a definite economic impact as well. So that's what's kind of setting the basis for why we are going to the city and saying we need to prepare. We need to have some kind of plan. So what we are anticipating on the local level, I love this phrase, is from the UN Foundation, and it is, we must manage the unavoidable and avoid the unmanageable. So what we are proposing with the Climate Action Plan in terms of managing the unavoidable, we're talking about adapting. These greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for up to centuries. We are experiencing the impacts of emissions that occurred 100 years ago or more. Even if we all stop driving our cars and heating our houses or cooling our houses or emitting any kind of extra man-caused human or carbon emissions tomorrow, we still are going to have to deal with the impacts of climate change for a long time to come. So we need to adapt. Here on a local level, we could be seeing fluctuations in the supply and the cost of energy, of food, of water. We're going to be looking at disruption in services. And we need to be specifically targeted toward helping people, especially at the vulnerable end of the population. So elderly people who can be very susceptible to heat waves, and heat waves are in fact the leading weather-caused kind of source of death, of mortality, even more so than tornadoes and hurricanes. It's heat waves that kill people, and there are certain groups of people that are more vulnerable to that. We need to protect the low-income people because they spend a greater proportion of their income on energy costs than higher-income people. Children, people with respiratory diseases, so we need to be sure that we also protect those groups and take those groups into account. So what we're looking at when we are managing the unavoidable, that's adaptation, basically. And when we talk about avoiding the unmanageable, there is that tipping point, that point at which the ice sheets on Greenland, the ice sheets on Antarctica start melting. Well, they are starting to melt already, but when they totally melt down. When we have the methane that's frozen at the bottom of the ocean that's starting to, unfreeze and release into the atmosphere. When we're looking at permafrost, we're getting into these positive feedback loops that we cannot stop. And then we're headed toward catastrophe. And all we can do as a society, as a civilization then, is buckle your seatbelts and hope you make it from day to day. It's just survival at that point. So we really need to avoid that kind of unmanageable situation. So the other part of our climate action plan is mitigation, which is to actually drastically reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we emit. So if I may, I just want to go through kind of basically the 5 parts of having a climate action plan. So the first is you cannot manage that which you cannot measure. So you have to have a greenhouse gas inventory. That sets your baseline. That's where you start measuring from. Then you take that information and you set your greenhouse gas reduction targets. And typically that's expressed in something like, it's you want to achieve a X percentage decrease in this year's baseline amount of emissions, and then you will do it by a particular point in time. So like, I think Eugene's is like a 50% reduction in their 2010 level of emissions by 2050 or 2035, whatever it is. So that's typically what they look like. Then you implement, you create your plan. So that usually involves looking at a whole bunch of different actions that you could take. You go through an evaluation process of scoring those kinds of things. You're looking at, well, how effective would each thing be? And that includes in cost effectiveness. What kind of impact will it really make? You look at is it achievable? I mean, will the community support it? And does it really fit in with any kind of framework of regulation? And you look at co-benefits, because doing a lot of these kinds of actions that typically you find in a climate action plan, will produce higher livability, greater livability, improved public health, cleaner water, cleaner air. It will protect vulnerable communities. So you go through this kind of rating process to actually create and come up with a plan. Then you implement it. That goes on for years. And during that time, you're monitoring and evaluating it, because you need to tweak it wherever you need, to make it work better. And some of them, they play out over longer scales of time than others. So that's basically what happens with a climate action plan, getting it established and addressing the reason why we really need to get started on this.
Well, your group is called 350 because we're talking about 350 parts per million, and we're currently at 400 plus.
410.
410.
Yeah.
This week.
So, we need to start working at reducing those numbers as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why, it's one of the big reasons why I invited you on this show, because I think it's something that we need to start really looking at as individuals and as a society. And some of us, have been maybe doing these things for a long period of time, but as a society, we need to get on and start working toward these goals.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to go back to what you said about that letter, because I laughed when I saw it.
Oh, okay.
Because that's an old argument. They've been recycling that argument for years, and I'm like, can't you do better than that? And I looked it up, and it was produced originally. One of the people that produced it was Richard Lindzen, who is at MIT in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, and every other member of that department, in the big department at MIT, signed a statement saying, he's not right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's it's a very small number of actual climate scientists who will come out. And, there's been evidence that there's a sort of a lot of money going into funding people that will deny and stuff like that. But I just wanted to get back to the climate action plan and
Sure.
look at some of the things. Well, I think I told you before we came in here that our group, 350 group, we have been researching plans in some of this, particularly focusing on Oregon and other cities, to see how they do what they do, how they got it, into effect, and what it looks like when they do it. And the two we focus most on were Eugene and Corvallis, as sort of being more like Salem than Portland is, which has the kind of gold standard for like doing it. But they're much bigger and have different kinds of resources. So we looked pretty intensively at Eugene and Corvallis. Eugene has had one for several years. The mayor and city council really pushed it. In I think starting around whenever Kitty Piercy became mayor, 2005 or 6, really pushed to make it happen. They developed their plan. They're implementing it. And they actually wrote an ordinance that says, it will be done, it shall be done, it must be done. After they really had a plan going for a while. And there's actually 2 plans, and most cities do it this way. There's one for the city's own facilities and operations, their vehicle fleet in Eugene. They have goals for different areas of the city, and then there's also one that looks at the community-wide process. So in most places that is the way they do it, and they often look at in the community. They will look at typically the kinds of sectors they look at are buildings and energy use, land use and transportation, which sort of have to go together. Because if you want a bus, but there's like 2 houses a million miles away, it doesn't work. You need a land use coordination with the transportation plan. Consumption and waste. Urban natural resources, food and agriculture, and health and human services. And that last one goes a lot toward the adaptation that Linda was talking about. There will be more of a need for assistance for people. There will be scarcities of certain kinds. There will be times of disaster or extraordinary circumstances. And like Linda also said, that the lower income people get hit hardest every way. So there need to be policies that can help mitigate the effect on them of both climate action and of the transition to different kinds of energy, different patterns of living that we are going to need. So if I could just take Eugene as an example, because of the more smaller scale cities, sort of more like Salem, theirs has been in effect the longest. Corvallis has one that they kind of developed. Well, I just want to say something about that. They came at it from a different way. About several groups in the community, including the 350 chapter there, they actually went out and did a huge amount of resource and developed their own plan. Took it to the city council, and the city council said, "Oh yeah, we need a plan." But then they decided to do their own. I mean, they didn't sort of take the one that community generated and adopted whole cloth, but they set up a task force to do it. So it happens different ways depending on what the city politics is like, what the community is like, and it's very interesting to see how how people have gone about it. But say that, for example, in Eugene, in looking at their city operations, I'm going to have to kind of read this because some of the detail, I don't like have in my head. I'm sorry, you want to ask?
No, go ahead.
Okay. They are replacing half of their police investigation vehicle fleet with hybrids, and then they have they didn't specify in the report that I saw what kind of vehicle, but for their patrol vehicles, they're also looking at replacing many of the cars with higher fuel efficiency vehicles, and they expect in 2018, once they complete this phase of the program, that they will have fuel savings of 67,000 gallons a year, and about $200,000, savings in the city after they do this. They also are looking at energy efficiency upgrades in facilities, like buildings that the city operates, pools, swimming pools, park facilities and things like that. And they are also expecting a $200,000 annual savings when they have these programs in place, plus lower maintenance costs. That's what they're looking at. in their community-wide initiatives, they have, I just picked out a few of the sectors that I mentioned and just kind of took some details from those. They have a Climate Masters at Home project that provides education to households on energy use and how to reduce it. They have had a block fund grant, I don't know, with the federal administration, that's a federal funding device, but they made it go away. But they did have one, and they did energy retrofits of 6 affordable housing complexes, and they saved 172,000 pounds of, greenhouse gas, emissions, and $22,000 in residents' energy costs a year savings. They have a program called Solarize Eugene, which works with community partners, businesses, and nonprofits to get a more streamlined permitting and installation and bulk purchasing process for residential solar, like you're putting on your roof or things like that. Land use and transportation, they have been working on this interesting concept called 20-minute neighborhoods, where the neighborhoods would have mixed use of like stores and pharmacies, services, doctors' offices, things like that, even a certain number of jobs, so that people could within 20 minutes, without using a car, be able to do many of the errands and business of their daily lives. And they studied and analyzed that idea, and they have a pilot program that they're beginning in one of the Eugene neighborhoods. And they also have other zoning changes that they're making to increase dense mixed-use neighborhoods around transit corridors. They have done some improvement on their bus system, in recent times. So they're talking about that and increasing their promotion of biking, walking, and mass transit. And the health and human services, the part that, speaks to, what might happen and how we might be able to, help people, in terms of things. They are conducting a climate and energy vulnerability assessment that looks at mid and longer term, vulnerabilities of essential services, like if there's a terrible storm, and the power goes out, or the water system is purification, So they're looking at the different systems within the city that they may need to harden, make more resilient, more reliable, in the future, in the cases of climate change. Looking at possible future demand for increased demand for hunger relief, if there are shortages in, with cropping and things like that. Looking at more food grown locally in backyards and community gardens and things like that. And increasing financial assistance for low-income populations to support energy efficiency retrofits in housing, and reduce their costs for utilities. So these are just examples. The whole report that I was looking at was like 69 pages, and they have like all these sectors with little graphs. Like we're doing this, we started that, we finished that one, and they have all these targets and goals within these sectors. They're very detailed and very comprehensive. So I just picked out a few. To offer as examples here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because like with development, if we're going to have a problem with the climate, we want to try to keep as much farmland as possible.
Yes.
So you don't want to be developing farmland because you got now more distance for people to travel, plus you're taking that out of food production.
Good point.
And one of the things that was kind of mentioned while you were talking was rainfall. Like this year we've got an awful lot of rain, but the previous 2 years we did not. And one of the problems that we're going to see along the West Coast is warming earlier in the spring so that they lose that water because they have to kind of keep their dams and like that at a certain level to make sure that they don't overflow. And that is supposed to be one of the big problems here on the West Coast as far as providing water. And water is a big issue throughout the West.
Right.
And that is something that can very easily affect us here in Oregon. We're used to having all that water. But if we end up with a drought, that's not going to be good for farming. It's not going to be good for people. You don't get along too well without water.
Right, right.
And food uses a lot of water.
Right, right.
Absolutely,
and we're really drawing down our aquifers over in central and eastern Oregon too. We don't even really know how much we have because we haven't had a fully funded hydrological study since 1950, I think, or it's been a long time, and they've been and that wasn't a specific study just for Oregon. It was kind of a regional study. So it's a very significant kind of issue, what we're going to do with water. And that affects energy because we often don't think about the fact that, we power Oregon primarily on hydroelectric energy, which requires running water, freely running water. And so if you've got some real, water scarcity of the not having snowpack, to store that water, or the water's coming at the wrong time in the wrong form, you're not going to have the same amount of energy production either. Right. So there will be, those fluctuations that I mentioned in both the supply and cost.
And that gets to the resiliency, and actually the cost of like solar is going down. It's much more affordable than it used to be. So that is something that we don't necessarily need to rely on input from out of the area so much. And a lot of the people don't realize this, but you lose about 30% of your electric power in transmission, depending on how far it's going. So if you have solar, you can have that right where you live or very close. You don't have to have this extensive grid with high power going through and losing a lot of that. So those are things that make sense, not just because of climate change, but make more sense in diversifying how we get our power.
Absolutely, because then that kind of power is also distributed, so it's less susceptible to any kind of cyber attacks. You don't have it all concentrated, in specific large facilities, and it's healthier. It provides more employment for people. Those renewable energy jobs do generate, on average, about 2.5 times more jobs than the fossil fuel industry. So there's many benefits to be had from it, not just the climate change aspect.
And also health, because a lot of those fuels are filthy. In the air and the land and water. It helps. It's a big improvement in public health.
Because I know I lived back east for a while, and quite often when I was young, they were using coal still. And that's a dirty process from beginning to end. And my mother didn't like me playing in the basement with the coal. So
she was a wise mama.
She was. So we only have a couple of minutes left. Are there other issues that need to be, actually, if people are interested in this, we'll be having your website up at the end, but the June 1st meeting, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, what you'd like people to do.
Well, as we mentioned, the city is having a process of developing a strategic plan, and we want a climate plan as part of that. On June 1st, a week from today, actually, at 6 o'clock at the Broadway Coffee House at 1300 West Broadway Street, they are having an open house where people can come and see how the process has been going and hopefully have input into their ideas for the strategic plan, and we want a climate plan to be part of that. So you can help and support us as we are there. We will be there and look at some of the other issues too. There are other important issues. And also we have a petition that we want to give to the City Council, and it is on our website, which has been shown on the screen. I'll say it again. It's www.350SalemOR, all one word, no punctuation, 350SalemOR.org. And our petition is right there. We hope you will sign it and join us on June 1st.
And let the city know that there's people that are very interested in this issue.
Yes.
And because I think that's one of the things too, is that the city council and the mayor and city staff need to hear from folks that this is something that is important to them, that it's something that we're not going to ignore, that it's something that's essential. And I want to thank you both for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity very much.
And join us next week on City Beat.